Spirit of place, the Waterways village, Genius Loci. Can you claim that a 2,000-mile stretch of water that passes through thousands of different places, from global cities to tiny rural hamlets, is also a single place? If you're talking about the waterways of England and Wales, I would argue you certainly can. This is a long, extended village with a single watery street that glides through the industrial mill towns, the bucolic villages, modern city centres and some of Britain's most glorious countryside. And on that street of often muddy water are the boats and their occupants that bring together the disparate locations, crossing and recrossing the network as they travel. Like some slow-motion, infinitely complex dance, the boats meet and briefly interact as the people who steer them, sleep on them and love them join together, perhaps briefly with a wave as the vessels pass one another, perhaps for a night or two as they share a mooring, maybe for several noisy, boozy days and nights at a Waterways festival. Whether it's the upmarket city village of Primrose Hill in the heart of London, a small market town of the Midlands, or miles of wooded cuttings and high embankments with stretches of open fields on either side meandering toward the Welsh hills, it's the boats that tie them together over time, guided by the people who live, work and play upon this constantly flowing street. And today's boats are the successors of the cargo-carrying boats of the past and the horse-drawn boats of an even earlier century. These people, the boaters of Britain, share some things that make them a community in a unique way. They're not neighbours, they may not meet for months, even years at a time, perhaps never. They have no local council, community centre or even a pub or a club to share. Instead, they share something less tangible, a love of the waterways, a desire to travel on the water, whether it's for a mile or 20 miles, and a fascination for a living, working piece of history. So waterways have always played a key role in our development, from the time the first sails were added to boats in the Middle East 6,500 years ago, to the building of the Canal of the Pharaohs 4,000 years ago, through to the Dover Bronze Age boat, the oldest known plank vessel built 2,500 years ago. And in Britain, our rivers were used for transport from the time of the earliest settlers, the Beaker people, giving easy access into the heart of the country. The Romans built several canals in England, mostly in the fens, and the Fosdyke is still in use 2 millennia later. And today's waterway village is a key landmark in the timeline of global development. Without the canals being built 250 years ago, the Industrial Revolution would not have been born, or at least it wouldn't have had the impetus to change our whole society to a technology-led, fast-growing engine of change and trigger a similar revolution across the globe. The spirit of the waterways as a place, without getting into fanciful nonsense about well-being and all the rest of the intangibles currently being plugged by the Canal and River Trust, the spirit of the waterways is set by its heritage, and this is a 250-year-old monument to the ingenuity of mankind. Now, most boaters will tell you it's as interesting to cruise through the steelworks around Birmingham or Sheffield and past the abandoned mills of Lancashire as it is to be surrounded by the green fields and constant bird chatter of the Shropshire Union Canal or the Llangollen. And the city canals, with their slowly growing population of full-time boaters, epitomise the youthful part of this place's people. The city canals are not only a popular place to visit, they're home to the boating equivalent of teenagers with their first car. A bit older than teenagers, perhaps, often graduates, even more often creative people, usually short on money. These boaters are pursuing their dream, and the waterways are the place that give them the freedom to do that. Freedom to move, freedom to work in poorly paid jobs in the music industry or journalism or filmmaking in the heart of a very expensive city with ridiculous property prices. Then there's a fairly massive age gap to the next group of people who live in the Waterways village. They tend to be the retired, sometimes well-heeled, with homes to go to. Not always, though. Increasingly, for that group, buying and living on a boat whilst travelling through the waters of Britain is both a fulfilling and cost-effective use of their available capital and income. Regardless of which group they fall into, there is a general affection and some understanding for the history of the place where they live or spend their time, and the knowledge that this is a special place with roots that go back centuries. The people of the Waterways value the ancient structures and get all nostalgic for an age they don't really remember when they hear the erratic pop, 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 pop of a passing Bollinger engine driving an historic narrowboat. And the people of the Waterways get angry too when their place isn't looked after properly by those appointed by government to do so, and when boaters are pushed into second place or worse by the peripheral canal and river users on the bank. They're acutely aware that they are a disenfranchised people with no democratic say in the governance of where they live, and that shows in their suspicious and sometimes justifiably hostile attitude to the Canal and River Trust, the governing body forced on them by a government only concerned with getting financial responsibility for an historically central piece of our national heritage and that of the world off their books. Now, I see the Waterways as something quite unique, the largest single piece of our national heritage in working order, and with a new role in a modern age that doesn't conflict with that heritage. In fact, the whole system should be a World Heritage Site because it was that important to global development. We should be, as a nation, proud of it, nurture it and spend whatever it needs to keep it fully functional and in one piece. Instead, of course, we've had to witness a pseudo-charity created as a cost-cutting device by a Tory government going in hand this year to another, later, Tory government to beg for funds, using all sorts of dubious excuses but never ever saying straight out, this is a vital part of our national heritage, it must be funded properly with public money. And I now see the levels of discontent rising steadily as heritage buildings are flogged off, the vital infrastructure neglected, and boaters either steadily attacked or ignored by the Canal and River Trust. I predict that trend will only accelerate as this government decides later this year that the charity is not to have any more public financial support, or at best a dramatically reduced level of funding, as the whole system then goes into irreversible decline. The Waterways village will then have to demonstrate that it is truly a single place, one community, united to fight the political barbarians who don't care enough about this unique place to look after it. After 20 years as a boater, most of them on the Waterways as my only home, I believe the spirit of this place, this long, straggling village of water, will rise up to give those who threaten its future the bloody nose they deserve.